And I'll pause for just a couple seconds and then we'll start, because there's always a slight delay. All right. Hi, everyone. We're back on the stage with our closing panel, an amazing panel to end our summit. We'll be talking on the film Coded Bias, and we're going to be talking both about the film and some of the realities based on the expertise that we have on this panel. Bryan Cox is going to come on. He is the computer science specialist at the Georgia Department of Education. And then we have Dr. Kathaleena Monds. She's a professor and founding director of the Center for Educational Opportunity at Albany State University here in Georgia. And then we've got Brandon Nicholson, founding executive director from the Hidden Genius Project. He's based out of Oakland, California. Super excited to have him join us on this conversation. And then we have Hal Speed, CS Ed advocate. He's also the founder of CS4 Texas. He's been working on that for many years now, and also a board member for the national group called AI for K-12. So we're super excited to have such a wealth of expertise on this panel, and we're gonna get started with our conversations here. We want to let everybody know that hey Bryan, great. It worked. We want to let everybody know that last night we hosted a watch party with a group of attendees who viewed the film together with us, and also participated in a live chat. If you were one of those participants last night, we'd love to hear from you in the chat about your thoughts, any comments or questions that you would like this panel to address, and let us know what you thought about that. So I'm going to actually start out with that question. Kathaleena and Bryan, you were in attendance last night. How were you with us last night too? But you've seen the film as well too.
I was with you in spirit. I watched it on Netflix last night.
So we've all seen the film, and so I'd like to start with you, Kathaleena, and just talk about, how did the film impact you as an educator, and as an advocate, because this is absolutely in your wheelhouse. and what were your favorite parts of the film? What stood out to you? What were some concerns? Some general thoughts about the film first.
Wow. Thank you, first of all, Lien, for organizing this year's conference. It's been fantastic. And yes, I think last night's viewing was about my 5th iteration of watching Coded Bias, and the work that Joy Bolawini has done is just fantastic. So there are a few things that Bryan, well, those who were on the watch party last night, there were things that I think, one, certainly create opportunities for teachers, K-12 teachers, as well as students, in terms of end users and how they approach and utilize technology. I think that the highlight, certainly, of the video was this conversation around arithmetic obedience training, right? In other words, the ways in which AI can be used to dictate how we as end users behave. And so I think it's important, again, starting with the end in mind, if there are teachers or district leaders in the conversation today, 1, you need to watch this video, show it to your kids. 2, join the Algorithmic Justice League. And then 3, I think it's important that we help students understand that as they volunteer their own data, their selfies and their location indicators, all of that big data helps to, if you will, create this algorithm that, unfortunately, according to in the work of the video and certainly the research behind Coded Bias, brings about this kind of arithmetic obedience training. In other words, the data will serve to dictate how we operate in our own lives. And that's the scary part of the video, kind of the unintended consequence. And so we'll get into some more conversations about what the others on the panel think, but that certainly comes to mind.
Thanks. Bryan?
Good afternoon. Welcome to Last and Final Track. The first thing that came to mind with the film, and this is something that comes to mind with these sorts of documentaries, is that they're not widespread enough. Oftentimes with these sorts of documentaries, of these films, you get people who are already on board, who are already knowledgeable, who are already in this space to watch them and engage. And one of the things that I appreciate about Coded Bias is how approachable it was and how easily digestible it was, so that, you know, teachers that don't have a background in AI or don't have are new to computer science or anything like that, or even students that have never experienced CS before, it clearly shows how these technologies and these skill sets impact their daily lives. But even more, what it reminded me of is how important it is that we include this sort of instruction, this perspective in our CS instruction. Like, it's not just a technical skill set. There are social implications. So it's not just for people that are going to become programmers or people that are going to become AI practitioners in that space. That number is relative to the full population, relatively small. But this is a knowledge, this is an understanding and an awareness that needs to be more pervasive. So yes, I think the watch party was fantastic, but I don't think we had any students there. I think that it has to get into the hands of more teachers. And I think that there are steps that we can take to make it, to make this sort of instruction more explicit and more systemic. So that's one of my takeaways from that. I have lots of others, but I'll defer.
Great, thanks, Bryan. And Brandon, I know you weren't at the watch party last night, but I know you've also viewed the film, and was wondering, from your take in the role that you have now, you know, what are some things that stood out to you in the film, and how are those you know, learning points like merged into the work that you're doing right now?
Sure, it's a great question. First of all, thank you again for allowing me to join again. Hello to the good people of Georgia again. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you at a much more reasonable hour in Pacific time after joining at 6 a.m. yesterday. But no, I really enjoyed this film. I actually watched it a couple times now. And there are many points I think that stuck out. There's a moment, you know, where Tim New Gabray is actually speaking with the team. I think it's Deb from U of Toronto, and of course the protagonist from MIT. And they're talking about, I think, Amazon's response to the study they released. And there's a moment, you know, they're kind of walking through like the fallacies in the responses, right? In the statements, and they arrive at one that says, you know, basically computer vision is a component of machine learning. And, you know, Tim New says like, nah, bruh, or whatever it is. But I think, and so I'm like having to like really think about it. And I got to go look it up, right? And understanding like the implication of certain elements of what we see as like artificial intelligence, and then its relation to machine learning. But certain elements of artificial intelligence are very much informed by human inputs, right? And I think what that moment though signifies for me is just, we have a choice. We have any number of choices, but we certainly have a choice about whether we want to be more offended by the concern about the thing, or more offended by you know, the fact that we have so much farther to go to be able to solve and refine the thing, right? And so that was one of those moments where the assertion was more disturbing to Amazon than the practice, right? going out of their way to mischaracterize then what the origin of the manifestation of the practice was, right? Rather than trying to figure out, hey, what are the implications of this and what might we do to, enhance that. So I think that in a nutshell captures, the work we do with our young people with the Hidden Genius Project, especially in our immersion program. And historically, we haven't been able to do a ton of work around artificial intelligence or machine learning until this year. This summer marks the first year we're able to have an artificial intelligence track for our returning geniuses. They have a 15-month commitment, 2 summers. So this is for some of the young men opting into the track. This is their 2nd summer, and they can build an AI anchored project. So we're really proud of that. But the theme we focus on, regardless of what people's interests are, AI, entrepreneurship, just hanging out, whatever it is, it's just about having a sense of awareness of the impacts of the choices we make as technologists, as entrepreneurs, as citizens, but also giving grace. The number one job we have in our organization is to create safe space for young people, especially our boys and young men, to make mistakes, right? And to still be who they are and not land on, in school suspension or disproportionate punishment or judgments for choices they've made. And I think in that regard, as we seek to teach the additional lessons, try and encourage them to be great people, or at least be empathetic, to listen, and then to just understand what their impacts are and make the choices they're in. I think those young people then probably have a lot to teach a lot of us, including our friends at Amazon who released that statement, right? There's nothing wrong with wanting to make a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with wanting to test really aggressive technologies that have all these implications. It's probably great if we can just admit what we're doing and then either say, we have no interest in rectifying this, perhaps because of our philosophical beliefs, or perhaps because of what we stand to gain, or shoot, we'd like to address it, but we don't really know how. And sometimes that can be tough to say. But it's better to come out to say that than try and, mansplain machine learning to some of the foremost experts and just look foolish that way. So certainly a lot of learnings out of the film, but that was one of the biggest themes that stuck with me.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. And Hal, I'd like for you to follow up because, you play several key roles in this community, and you're also on the board for AI for K-12. And as you were watching the film, what things that were raised that you thought, hey, we should be discussing this in CS education,
Yes.
What were some of those things and your thoughts?
Well, one thing I want to highlight, I don't think it's been addressed over the past couple of days, is that Georgia's the first state that I'm aware of that has 3 courses already on the books for AI. And so Georgia is leading the country in tackling this problem to make sure that high school students are getting access to some of these courses, and other states will follow. So kudos to Georgia and the work that Bryan and his team have been doing around that. One of the things that really stood out for me this time that I watched it, having kind of already got the surprise information about the biases, was Zeynep's quote right at the very end about it's not what AI will do on its own, but what powerful people will do with AI. And then trying to use kind of our decomposition skills from computer science, that this is a really big problem. There were a few different themes that emerged in the film around. There's the creation and development of these algorithms, and then there's the usage and deployment and almost consumption of these algorithms. Sometimes they're the same actors, but sometimes they're not. And then on the development side, they really don't distinguish between the rule-based kind of AI and then the learning type of based AI, and where the human involvement is on each of those different types of AI. So on rule-based AI, it's the humans that are then writing the rules. And so whatever biases and discrimination that the humans have the ability to get interjected into the writing of those rules. On the learned style of AI, so like machine learning and deep learning, the computer is learning the rules. And what the human is doing is feeding the machine the data to then learn the algorithm and the neural network to be able to do the classification and things like that. And so where the human intersects these developments of AI are in two different places. And I don't think they did a really good job. I mean, for the audience, I mean, the audience was not computer science education teachers, right? So, for an audience like this, I think we need to understand a little bit better the nuances of what's going on, and then how do we bring that into the classroom?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. There is another quote in the film on the myth of tech neutrality, right? It goes sort of along the lines of what you were speaking to, Hal. And I'm going to read it, and I'll also post it in the chat for those that didn't watch it or want to follow along. The quote says, "Technology is often regarded as a neutral decision maker, which can make decisions as well as, or even better than humans, because AI makes decisions based solely on relevant data." Right? So it sort of goes along with what you were talking about. I'm thinking this is a dangerous thing. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so, I don't know who you're posing the question to, Lien, but one of the things I'm thinking about as it pertains to the quote from the video in terms of tech neutrality was, do each of you remember during the documentary, there was an African-American young lady who had a criminal encounterance, if you will, and the data, the artificial intelligence, in spite of her good intentions, in spite of the work that she had been doing real time in her life to contribute to society, the artificial intelligence and the data had her continued to be labeled as this quote unquote bad actor, if you will, or this citizen that was not providing positive impacts. And so I think, Lien, as I think about your question, and tech neutrality, that's a hard sell. And I know, Brandon, you made the statement a moment ago that it's okay to make mistakes. But I think what I saw from Coded Bias last night is that the unintended consequences of how AI is doing its, the machine-based predictions are going to be very hard to reverse, if you will, because there's a whole line of systemic issues that have to be addressed, from how do lawyers interpret the data, how do judges interpret data. And you saw from the documentary how Joy and Kathy O'Neill, who is an author discussed in the documentary, talked about, and I'll use Kathy's quote, she says, data embeds the dark past. And so if judges are being served and lawyers are being served up with artificial intelligence data that labels populations from two angles, to your point, Al, those labels are generated by human rule-based algorithms. And then those labels are equally being generated by computer technology algorithms. And sadly enough, when there is human error, as we saw, and technological error, then the consequences of going back are going to be really hard to reverse, because this is a very big issue that certainly I think that has to be addressed. So that's a good quote. I'm not sure that I would certainly say that AI has made it very bit of a challenge, if you will, for those of Black and brown people, if you look at Joy's data, to be properly categorized.
Yeah. Anyone else want to respond as well?
Yeah, I was going to say, no, I certainly appreciate that too. And Kathaleena, I appreciate you calling that out. I think the challenge, of course, with the human side of this, and not even in the human, kind of data input, but just the idea of, if we establish at such high stakes, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, I guess, in that respect, right? I think that's what we seek to do with our young people. Let's establish that this stuff matters. It's high stakes. For example, if you become a successful entrepreneur, and you're wealthy beyond your wildest dreams, what are the decisions you make from there on that may have implications for everyone else? Just, is it, you're producing some hard good and there's a byproduct from its production, right? And where are you producing it, and who's impacted? What's the environmental quality like, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a difference between being able to name that and say that, hey, if you get something wrong, then automatically you're a bad person, right? And some of that is the human piece, is just that because if I tell you you can't ever get it wrong, or it's tied to your character, then you'll probably spend just as much time, as we saw, convincing me you didn't get it wrong, if not more time than you do trying to fix it, right? And so I want to make sure I reinforce your point, and also just clarify that point, which is we need to make it okay, especially in computational thinking, computer science, period. We need to help young people continue to embrace the fact that it's a space where you get it a lot more wrong. Actually, believe it or not, I think they run together, that we mystify and almost deify some of the, great contributors to these spaces so much that we're not talking about, when you're doing computational thinking, computer science, when you're building, it's really a bunch of bumping your head and tripping over yourself until something actually kind of works. And so if we looked at it that way, if we were being honest with ourselves about that, then we'd understand that, hey, if you just produce this technology that's doing facial recognition, that's predicting risk level for recidivism, et cetera, chances are, because of the way this stuff works, meaning these processes to develop these things, chances are we got a lot of stuff wrong. Chances are there's a great deal of variance that cannot yet be explained right by the model we have. Can we be mature about this and then find the best way forward? It's okay. Yes, it's very real, right? And it's not okay to subjugate people and to ruin their lives by any means. But it's okay if you built something that doesn't quite work all the way that you thought it would. Let's just admit that, and then be solution oriented to immediately tackle the challenge of making sure it's got to be right, or at least be honest, so we don't implement it right until we feel as though our model is stronger, right? So it's one thing to build it, it's another thing to implement it.
And I think a little bit what we're seeing is maybe the transition between more deterministic style systems and more probabilistic style systems. So digital calculators, you put in the same equation, you get the same answer every time. You misspell a word in a word processor, you get the same correction every time. And so we've kind of conditioned ourselves that, yes, the technology is consistent and deterministic. As we move into artificial intelligence and machine learning, it now becomes more probabilistic. And I wish they'd have highlighted this a little bit more in the film, because rarely will you get 100% confidence level in a classification system in machine learning. So think of things like fingerprints and DNA and things like that, where you get back some probability match. Might be 90% probable, might be 95% probable, could be 70% probable. So there's not a black and white kind of binary part to classification in machine learning.
Also, and definitely to piggyback off what Hal was just saying, I have a brief background as an engineering teacher, and our understanding of technology is a little bit different. To give an analogy, this pen is technology, right? It's inert, it just sits there on the table. So this technology is impartial, right? But I can take this pen and I can write something on this piece of paper. I can either write a love letter or I can write a warrant, right? What I write with this pen has a huge impact on the world around me. The love letter, creates a good relationship. The warrant creates a negative relationship. We can talk about this computer as circuits and wires and chips, and those are inert. But what we do with this computer, the type of AI that we produce, how we roll that out, the perspective that we put into our writing, or we put into our programming, that's human. That's not the inert technology that we're always saying, oh, technology is it's impartial. It is. But the instant you write a program, that's not the technology anymore. That's you.
But Bryan, what happens when the pen decides what it wants to write?
Well, for the pen to have that, we have to create that technology.
Right.
That self, we have to create the pen.
Yeah, do we? What if the pen has intelligence of its own?
We have to give it that intelligence. Like I said, at some point, the physical world, which is inert, like the rocks, the trees, the metal that we dig up from the ground, in and of itself is not evil or good or anything like that. But when we take it and we give it extra properties, like we imbue it with additional properties like intelligence or algorithms or things like that, then it becomes biased. It becomes reflections of us, right? So we take a computer and we write a program.
Right. So potentially whoever teaches it to write,
yes,
could pass along whatever biases
correct,
that the teacher has.
And then the pen is no longer inert. Now it is whatever you made it. It's a nuclear weapon. It's you know what I'm saying? It's a death sentence. It's whatever you turned it into, it becomes that. So it's not, AI in of itself is not the same inert technology. When we talk about technology being unbiased, that's not what we're talking about. That's completely biased. That's completely created by human beings.
But Al, I think you also make a point. If you think about kind of the role of K-12 teachers as they teach AI to students, how they themselves bring their own biases to that instructional practice. And so I think one of the things that also, if you think about the documentary, at the start of the documentary, Joy Buolamwini never went in with the intention of doing the research that's known for. In fact, her research project was totally dealing with art and graphics, or I can't remember, of sorts. But I think her discovery process and the work that she did with the coded bias research was really a manifestation of trial and error. So I think you'll both have some really awesome points there.
And so to kind of continue on this line of discussion, I get this question a lot from teachers. They don't know what to say to people when they are asked, will AI replace all our jobs? Has it started happening already? How do you think AI is going to be impacting the workforce and our livelihood? And what can we do now as educators, to become more informed about those kinds of impacts on our jobs, employment, workforce, economy, etc. Brandon, you want to kick us off on that?
Sure. Well, I know it's a big and weighty one, and I'm probably not nearly qualified enough to weigh in on all aspects of it. Well, I guess what does come to mind, though, it actually can build on the conversation we're just having, is how much, we just, it's, when we speak, for example, about power dynamics, gender, race, sexual identity, gender identity, sexual preference, et cetera, so much of it can feel, so many of us really want to feel, we want to be good people, right? Just, I can be a great person and just, again, make mistakes every day, right? Or just have blind spots and I have to get better. And so, sometimes the challenge of these conversations is, I know, like, it can, just elicit or evoke defensiveness, right? Where I'm happy to assume that, like, most of the stuff is just not working. Even, like, it's hard still, right? Like, if someone says, man, I think the Hidden Genius Project could be so much better. Like, I can feel that in my gut. And yet at the end of the day, I know it could, right? Like, that's why I'm working every day. That's why I still have a job. And so we've talked about, like, the power that goes into any decisions we make, including at my job, but certainly in this space. I think it's such an important theme, because you think about artificial intelligence and the implications for the economy and work. We know that automation can accomplish a lot. That's not the same as asking the question, whose job's going to get replaced. But when I say that, I would love to take a study, because I'm a researcher by trade, at training and trade, right, before I got into this role. So I'm going to say I'm only speaking on intuition and observation, not on data, but if someone has it. But I'd love to know how median salaries and income compensation have moved for financial managers over the past, say, 2.5 decades. My hunch would be that those salaries have not decreased by a magnitude, say, that other roles have that have been, quote unquote, automated, perhaps, or not even remained stagnant, toll taking, factory work, et cetera. Now, mind you, there have been some pretty dramatic gains in automation with respect to financial management, prediction, and investment decision-making, right? But it's curious. I imagine, again, I don't have all the data. I'm sure we could Google it really fast, and I encourage anybody to drop it into the chat if you can. But I imagine, for some odd reason, that the salaries and compensation of people in those spaces not dipped as dramatically as those working industries that have seen corollary, right, or parallel gains in automation, right? The answer to that, power, right? And where people stand to lose, people with capital, but we all want to make more money. And so the technology continues to improve, right? I say that, and Lynn, you're probably like, what are you saying? So what I'm saying is, we don't know what's going to kind of go away or not, but we also cannot pretend as though power isn't a huge part of that. And if power were not a huge part of it, then automation would just take stuff down as soon as it can be automated. But the great news is power means we have the power, the agency to identify ways to either mitigate or identify new opportunities that actually emerge from automation that create more opportunities and jobs for individuals or allow people to make a better living. But if we don't admit what's really at play, we'll have conversations like, well, you can take the toll with the machine. Well, you can also put together a pretty great portfolio. And yet we haven't let all those people go yet either. So let's have a conversation about why not and what that means. And then how do you move forward?
Yeah. Oh, no, I think your point was very well made on the issue of power and our ability, to make the kinds of decisions that are going to impact a few, impact many, and how those few or many are impacted. I think that's a great point. Does anybody want to follow up on that or make a different point?
I have lots of opinions on this. I could do a whole session or potentially a whole day. To me, I think we're at the epoch of what intelligent machines are going to be. So just like the start of the Industrial Revolution, and as steam and other automations came in to replace physical labor, we're at the very beginning of what intelligent machines will be able to do to replace human intelligence. I think the jobs that are at highest risk right away are the human robots that are already out there working in warehouses, working as baristas, working as truck drivers. Those are just another, I call them biochemical robots as opposed to electromechanical robots. They're doing the same thing, and right now the economies of scale are such that we can afford to pay a human to do it versus a machine. What happens when machines get the level of intellect to start taking over some of these cognitive jobs that humans currently have?
Mm-hmm.
And the one comment I wanted to make, Lien, just kind of thinking about the video, as you recall from the documentary, and I think it was Kathy O'Neill who kind of made this comment regarding, they were having a conversation around surveillance, and she chatted about really kind of the impact of surveillance on the poor. And so what she tried to do is try to create this kind of this scenario in the sense that she mentioned that it's poor people that are the early adopters of artificial intelligence. It's the poor people that are the early adopters of technology that helps to build these AI systems. And sadly enough, it's the poor people that are more negatively impacted because AI has yet to kind of refine those rules, if you will, that helps to kind of parse through the data to ensure that there's no foul play. I know that, she says here that the poor really are the ones who are the testers of the technology. And by the time that the AI is refined to the point where the wealthy adopters, by that time, Joy has done research where she's looked at several AI platforms, but she's, with the chart where she shows 100% match. And so I think that, when I think about, will AI replace humans? I think it's a question of what will the human cost be as it pertains to the users of technology. And if poor people are going to, or marginalized populations are going to be victimized from technology and coded bias, then certainly it would be worth, our time to continue to research what are the implications of such.
I have a perspective that I want to piggyback on Kathaleena, but I'm going to attempt not to fall into a black hole because I can, like Hal, I can speak at length about this particular concept. But and Brandon mentioned this earlier. One of the things that drives the creation of this technology is often profit, right? We live in a society which is based on for profit, which is defined by a scarcity of resources, right? However, technologically, our society, our species has reached a point where the scarcity is a fallacy, like it's perpetuated unnecessarily, right? But our technology is going to get to the point where the work that we do in order to compete in the society is going to be continually replaced by automation and AI, and it's going to continue to happen for the perpetual future. Like we're going to continue to develop technologically. If we don't shift conceptually away from this idea of scarcity, then we're going to exacerbate that group of people you're talking about, Kathaleena. It's going to unnecessarily, right? Because we're going to take jobs. Like every revolution, industrial revolution that we've experienced, the jobs transition. But where we're at right now is we're going through a huge transition where a lot of our, like what Hal was talking about, we're going to move from right now where we are, where the mechanical jobs are going to be replaced, to the cognitive jobs being replaced. And at that point, what do humans do? Well, if there's still scarcity, then there's going to be crime. Like people are going to still need to get their basic needs. But the scarcity is a fallacy. The technology can need to replace that. If we create a structure where our technology is actively eliminating the needs of the humans, like the scarcity, then there will be less growing pains. But if we maintain our power structure, our existing operating way of dealing with power and dealing with resources and marginalizing groups and all of that, if we maintain that, there's going to be a lot of pain. It's going to be a lot of like a lot of revolution, a lot of pushback. So we have the opportunity right now at this point to intentionally design systems and artificial intelligence and automation in a way that it will address the basic needs of human beings, such that division doesn't have to happen. But if we don't, that division is going to widen, like Kathaleena was mentioning. So
yeah. Well, thank you for your perspectives on that question. We're going to move into sort of the last phase of this discussion with a question on what educators can do. What are some thoughts on what we're currently doing and our role in advocating for industry or working with industry, to somehow figure out, like, how do we work together to solve for what Bryan was saying, really paying attention to our human needs, and the responsibility, like who owns that, in terms of the impact of AI. Where do educators sit in this now?
I'll try to take a stab first, and that way I can get out of the way, because I know you guys have some really awesome input, some contributions. So, Lien, as I was watching the documentary, there are a few things that came to mind, because of course, the work in the video around coded bias, and I have a few quotes in my notes that Joy Balamwini mentioned that data is destiny, or data is a reflection of our history. And so you asked a question about what educators can do. And when I see a comment, a quote that data is a reflection of our history, it is almost impossible in my mind to teach, instruct, develop, nurture, educate young adults in the space of AI without having some understanding of history in general. But certainly the history of diverse populations, more specifically. And I'm not going to say the word that is on the tip of everyone's tongue in the state of Georgia, but it is almost a direct contradiction to the need for more knowledge base around coded bias and algorithmic bias. It's almost a direct contradiction not to be able to engage teachers and students in conversations around diversity, And because it's almost, it's almost very difficult to do if you don't have questions around our history. Because again, our history dictates and contributes to how we see the world. And if there are only a handful of people that don't look like me who are making those decisions around the rule-based algorithms, then their history and their experiences and perceptions of themselves and or communities around them that varies, if that's going to be the benchmark to how, some, portion the rule-based algorithms are written, then it certainly belittles this important, need to include CRT in the conversation.
Yeah, I was reserving a question on critical race theory for the end. I'm kidding. That was a joke for Bryan. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Y'all don't want me to stay.
I am not
no. So any other thoughts about the role of education and taking on responsibility for the impacts of AI?
Well, I think this is part of the mission of AI for K-12, and Dave Turetsky is on here, who's one of the PIs for the initiative with the National Science Foundation, to outline what are the principles that each of the grade bands of students should be learning in the field of AI. And one of the big ideas is around societal impact. So not just the bits and bytes on the technical side, but the societal piece, as far as all the different grade bands, and then the goal of having that then integrated into the CSTA standards, the state standards. And I know Georgia's already looked at some of that as part of their project to create the courses. I wanted to go back to one thing about the film, if I could. One area that they really didn't talk much about, it was voice and voice recognition. There was a lot about images and image processing. To me, there's a lot more variability in voice, because you've got gender, age, languages, dialects, speech impediments, a lot of nuances. And you may have experienced, if you've got young kids, sometimes when they try to use a wake word for a smart speaker or a smart device, it may not recognize their voice or may not recognize the wake word when they try to say it, because the data that's been provided may not have included young voices or may not have included older voices. And so there's a project, I'll put the link in the chat here in just a second. Mozilla's got a project called Common Voice, where anyone in the world can contribute voice samples of reading text, so to try to create this worldwide kind of open database of voice recognition, so that we've got better data sets to be able to train the data with.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I was just going to say, I actually have experienced that. How I have a young daughter who has, she goes to speech therapy, and every time she tries to use our device, I don't want to name it, but it starts with a G. It's hard to. It often doesn't, pick up her speech. It's maybe the same speech and voice notion that you're talking about. So I have wondered about that. Great point. How Brandon?
Well, there's two things going on, right? There's the wake word to get the attention of the device. Mm-hmm. That is more locally stored and locally processed. Then once it wakes up, then it wakes up the cloud, and you get a lot more computing power to start doing that recognition. But that's why the wake word tends to be the bigger problem.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and of course there's great potential, right? When you think and unintended consequences in the positive way. My mother had multiple sclerosis for 40 years, and so at times the A word, the A version of the smart speaker has been almost literally a lifesaver, right? Because of dexterity challenges and the like, right? It allows for more powerful searches, et cetera. What I wanted to just say, I think, really appreciative for this conversation, but I almost forgot it last time, which is, our understanding of technology education and what's out there. Obviously we have many engineers on our panels and in the audience. We went through this really interesting, this very probably unfortunate period, and perhaps like rooted in angst and anxiety and the like, around like what are young people going to major in. It still manifests obviously today, but at a high level, right? And the philosophy majors and the poets and such, became the kind of the joke and the ire, and you need the hard whatever, the hard science. But what I love to impart upon young people, especially around this conversation, is, man, the philosophy majors and the psychologists and the poets have come back, because you have to design learning algorithms and learning processes that mirror the brain, right? So people who understand how the brain works, how the brain thinks, and how we weigh, questions, right? And so going to, Uber, gosh, I forget the facility they had for their experimental, designs, including their self or automated vehicle, right? They have to work through philosophical questions into the programming, right? So, if you see what appears to be a little child on the street, and you see what appears to be a kitten, and if you see a squirrel, and if you see a tree, where does the car go with the person in it? Right? These are questions that have been being posed to these people with majors we laughed at for generations, right? But that knowledge, deeper knowledge, has never gone away. So we also try and impart upon our young people that whatever you love, it's informing this conversation, right? It's not just the engineers, not just the people doing the programming, the coding, et cetera, the math. There's so much going into this, right? There's so many different components. So everyone has a place. We can really anchor in our strengths and our passions and inform this really important work.
Yeah. So one last question then, to end on a positive note. I would like to hear from each of you about, some your thoughts on the positive impacts of AI. Like, what can we hope for in terms of AI positively impacting our lives, our society? Kathaleena, you want to start us off on that?
Are you sure you want me to start? Because last night during the watch party, I was certainly had much angst and concern. So yeah, let me think through that. I think as I think about some of the positives, and I'll use a quote from the Future of Work report that the McKinsey Institute did, and it said that it's not humans versus machine, it's humans embedded by machines. And I think, as we think about kind of I think that, one of the hopes for the future is that we own our own information. That if there is a way, let's say, I'm a homeschool mom, and if there was a way that I could use artificial intelligence to be able to be more understanding and more predictive on the needs of my individual children, as by subject, by learning style, I think that there's certainly value in creating these kind of repositories where people can own their own data, where they can own their own experiences and use that data for their individual benefit, right? To create a more optimistic and a more better world. Because I think, as you look at coded bias, it is very, very much top down. And you saw when Joy went to the to do the legislative report, that many of the legislatures themselves are very unaware. And I think that there's this, this need to kind of regulate. But the reality is, I think that if individuals could, as I put out data, if they're going to be end users and serve up their individual data, I think it would behoove us as a future to find a way for that AI to come back to us in a way that it creates value for us as individuals, for ourselves, our communities, and our families and society.
Yeah, great.
Well, I could definitely lean in on some positives. Again, with a more rote understanding of technology, its goal is to make our lives more efficient. Like that's the ultimate goal of technology, whether it's to make our income stream more efficient or our work streams more efficient or whatever. It's supposed to improve our lives. Like that's always been the goal of technology. And similar to what Richard Ladner was saying in the chat, it has long been used to improve the lives of like marginalized populations and things like that. Like technology has that potential. And I'm optimistic in thinking that we can definitely realize that potential, and that with making sure that our efforts, that what we're doing right now, and we're including all types of people in this education process, and making sure that everybody's involved at the table when we're making these decisions about how the technology rolls out, we can definitely improve our length of life, like our quality of life, the amount of happiness we experience over the course of our lives. Like I can not have to cut my grass or vacuum my house or all of the things that are right now, we accept them as the toils of life. And, sometimes we even get to the point where we enjoy them. Because I found cutting my grass is very meditative, but if they can give me a robot that will cut my grass, I will definitely jump on that. Right. So
yeah, that already exists. There's a robot that will weed your grass.
Exactly. All right. So those exist. I don't have the funding to pay for those right now, but I assume technology is going to take us there. Right. I just know that we have to do it together. Otherwise, it's only going to take some of us there, and the rest of us are going to get left behind or marginalized and oppressed due to the technology. So I guess that's partially optimistic. It was a partially good note there.
No, that was good. That was good, Bryan. That was good.
Yeah, I think every sector is likely to be impacted by artificial intelligence and machine learning. Whether it's positively or negative, I guess, is relative to who you are and where you are. We're already as consumers benefiting from it today as we get recommendations from shopping sites or entertainment sites on things that we might also enjoy. And so instead of having to search hundreds or thousands of items, having an algorithm, if it's done properly, give me recommendations on what I might like and may not find on my own, I find that beneficial. There'll be commercial applications. In agriculture, you can start to evaluate each individual plant based on what type of fertilizer it needs or how much water it needs or if it has a fungus and things like that. So you can, at scale, go down to the micro level, and I think the potential is there for education as well. What if we could create an individualized learning plan for every student to meet the individual natures of who they are? It's hard to do that in the analog world, but if we're able to have automation machines that somehow facilitate that happening, that would be a great benefit to all students, to be able to meet them where they are and to progress them just like the greatest human teachers in the world. Anomaly detection, there are things like with your power grid, you could look at predictively analyzing the technology in the power grid to see if a transformer is going to fail so that you could take it out in a controlled manner and replace it so that you don't have an unplanned outage. So there's all kinds of ways that we can bring the technology to bear.
Brandon, do you want to weigh in on this one?
No, certainly. I mean,
yeah.
I would just say, I just want to just reinforce that I still believe in the technology, right? Just believe in responsibility, and it does so many great things, especially for me, having been a new parent in the last year, running out of hands. It definitely came in handy for sure. So.
When autonomous vehicles could greatly reduce accidents and fatalities on roadways. We're already getting kind of smart cars. Right? My car will pretty much avoid a rear-end collision if I get too close. It will slam on the brakes for me if I don't do it.
Yeah, I think there's certainly great value, but I think that if we fail to include this humanistic piece, right, then that's where we start going down the slippery slope, for sure.
For sure. I think that you're right. We could stay on and talk about this for a very long time, but we are just right at time, or maybe just a little over. But I think participants will forgive us for that, because this was such a great conversation. Again, I am just super pleased that you were able to participate on this panel. I want to thank each of you for taking the time and sharing your expertise with us. I hope that we will be able to stay connected with you, and that if the participants would like to reach out to you, that they can also connect with you as well. We can provide them your information. And so with that, I just want to say thank you for closing out our summit with the theme CS for Social Good. No better way to do that than to talk about the film and your thoughts on AI. So thank you so much for that. And to the participants, thank you for hanging in there. I'm going to, Bryan and I are going to just have some closing remarks, and then we will close out the summit in just a few minutes. We just have a couple of announcements. It won't take too long. Again, I want to give a heartfelt shout out to our last panel, because they they were just fantastic, all three of them. And Bryan, thank you for being on this panel as well after a long 2 days. Also chiming in on this panel was just amazing. So thank you for your assistance in helping to co-host this summit. Super appreciative of that and grateful to be working with you here in Georgia. And I also want to give a shout out to the computing equity team at Constellations behind the scenes. We couldn't make this happen without Isla and Miriam, who's our senior admin professional. She's been kind of hanging in and out as much as possible to support us. Sababu Barashango, Terry Foster, and Yolanda Payne. They are Constellations fellows. They were proctoring many of the sessions that you were in over the last 2 days. They're going to continue with us tomorrow as we do our district implementation workshops. And so just want to give you all a huge thankful shout out for helping to make this summit happen. Bryan, do you want to say a few words or moving on?
Sure. These are my favorite people. I love them. I feel like I have like a family.
My favorite people. I love them. Yeah. All right. So we're going to give you a couple of ways to stay connected with us as well. I'm going to, I just realized that I'm going to probably have to just post this in the chat. We've got our website. We're going to send you a survey to complete. We hope that you'll take it's less than 3 minutes, just a few minutes for you to complete the survey. We're going to send that out to you. You can, if you have questions, reach out to the Constellations team. There's our email. We have a newsletter. Sign up for that. We have a YouTube channel. We have a podcast, and we're on Twitter. So plenty of ways for you to connect with us. And Bryan, we can post your information there as well if you'd like to put it in the chat to let people know how they can connect with you as well too. Last words, Bryan.
Do good. Be good, do good. What does how Confucius say? I forget the quote about the superior person, but basically do good, think good, eat good, program well, like do good.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you all for being with us these last 2 days. We had a blast with you, and give us some feedback and help us, make this happen again for next year. In the meantime, as Bryan says, CS for social good is the way to go. Thank you all.
Peace.